All right, my secondary math 2 class. Today is going to be a review day, which means next class period is going to be your test. Okay, your test will most likely be on Wednesday, February 17th, because you won't have school on Monday the 15th, so yay. Okay, so let's get right into our review. So we are reviewing solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, but first in numbers 1 and 2, it's asking us to solve them by factoring. Okay, so when we're solving by factoring, remember, we need to look at our last number, or the number that doesn't have any variables attached. And in number 1, that's -1. Okay, so I need two numbers that are going to multiply to give me a -1, but what in the world are they going to add to? Okay, remember, it's not the number that's attached to the variable squared, it's the one in the middle. What is that going to add to? It's actually going to add to 0. Okay, so we need two numbers that multiply to give me -1, but add to give me a 0. Okay, what can multiply to give me -1? It's really only one option here. Has to be a +1 and a -1. Okay, well, what is 1 minus 1? We get 0. Beautiful, so now we can do our factors. So we have n plus 1 and n minus 1. And we're going to bring that equals 0 down. Okay, once we've factored it, we can go ahead and take each piece, because now we need to solve, and set it equal to 0. So I have n plus 1 equals 0. So if I'm trying to get n by itself, what is the opposite of plus 1? I'm going to subtract 1. So now I get, my first answer is n equals -1. Beautiful. Okay, now I can take my second piece, which is n minus 1, set that equal to 0 and solve. What is the opposite of -1? Going to add 1. So my second answer is n equals +1. And there we go. Okay, in quadratic equations, you're always going to get two answers. Okay, that is because of the squared right there. You're always going to get two answers. Okay, let's look at number 2. Okay, so there's a really important rule in order to solve using factoring or solving quadratics. Okay, what does it have to be equal to in order to solve? It has to equal 0. So we're going to write down must equal 0 to solve. Okay, super important. So we need to make this equal 0. So I need to move this positive 10n over to the same side as my n squared. So what is the opposite of positive 10n? It's going to be a negative 10n, and that's going to move him over there. So now I can rewrite it. I'm going to rewrite, always my squared comes first, so n squared. My one with the one variable goes in the middle, so minus 10n, and the plus 16 that was already over there. Now it equals 0. Now we can factor in order to solve. Okay, so I'm going to look at my number with no variables attached. That's positive 16. Okay, I need factors, or two numbers that are going to multiply to positive 16, but add to a -10. What two numbers multiply to positive 16, but add to -10? It's going to be, well, let's try some. Okay, so I know that maybe 1 and 16, that's not going to work. Let's try 2 and 8. Okay, 2 times 8 gives me positive 16. 2 plus 8 gives me a positive 10. Okay, so close, but how can we make it a -10? Remember, we can multiply a negative times a negative to give me a positive, and now we get -2 minus 8 more. Now we get our -10. Okay, so I found my factors. So I have n minus 2 in one, n minus 8 in the other, and it equals 0. Okay, so now I can go ahead and take each piece. N minus 2 equals 0 and solve. Okay, what is the opposite, or how do I get rid of -2? I'm going to add 2. So my first answer is n equals 2. Okay, now I'm going to take my second piece, which is n minus 8. set it equal to 0, and solve. What is the opposite of minus 8? It's going to be to add 8. So my second answer is positive, n equals positive 8. And there we go, 2 answers. Okay, so now for numbers 3 and 4. Numbers 1 and 2, we were solving using factoring. The rest of the problems, we are going to talk about the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is super important, so we need to write it down. Okay, so the quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, super important. Memorize this formula. If I have to go and YouTube that annoying song to memorize it, do that. Okay, so now let's look at number 4. It's asking us to identify the part of the quadratic formula known as the discriminant. Okay, so there's one specific part that's known as the discriminant. And we've practiced solving. It is the b squared minus 4 times a times c part. Okay, and if you look in your quadratic formula, it is this part right there. Okay, awesome. So now that we know these two formulas, we can go ahead and solve 5 through 8. So number 5, it's asking us to find the value of the discriminant. So we're just solving for the discriminant of each quadratic equation. Okay, remember, standard form. In fact, write this note on your paper. All these quadratics are written in what's called standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c. So we have some a's and b's and c's in here. Okay, so if this is written in standard form, this means that negative 9 is my a, negative 1 is my b, and positive 3 is my c. Okay, just to help us out, let's go ahead and write those out. So we know that a is negative 9 because it's in front of the n squared. B is negative 1 because it's in front of just the 1n. And c is 3 because it doesn't have any variables attached. Okay, so now that we know our a, our b, and our c, we can go ahead and plug it into our formula for our discriminant. So I have b squared minus 4 times a times c. I just didn't write the a's and the b's and the c's because we're going to fill them in with what we know. Okay, so my first is b squared. What is my b? That is negative 1. Minus 4 times a, what's my a? Negative 9, and my c is 3. Okay, well now we can go ahead and solve for it. Okay, so I have my first piece, which is negative 1 squared. Negative 1 times negative 1. It's going to give me a positive 1. Remember, a negative times a negative gives me a positive. It's going to subtract my next piece. Okay, my next piece, and I'm going to do this in a calculator. You're more than welcome to as well. I'm going to type 4 times negative 9 times 3. That's going to give me a negative 108. Okay, well, what happens when we have a double negative? 1 minus a negative 108. It actually turns into a positive. So what is 1 plus 108? We get 109 for the value of our discriminant. Okay, great job. Let's do number 6. So let's identify first our a, our b, and our c. So I know that a is in front of my x squared, b is in the middle, c is in the end. So I know a is positive 8, b negative 7, and c is also positive 8. Okay, so now I can go ahead, fill in my discriminant formula. B squared minus 4 times a times c. Okay, first comes my b squared, and my b is -7. Minus 4 times a is 8, times c is also 8. Okay, so we filled it in, now we can go ahead and solve. So I have -7 squared. What is -7 times -7? That's actually going to give me a positive 49. It's going to subtract our next piece, and our next piece, if you want to do this in the calculator, you're more than welcome to, is 4 times 8 times 8. That's going to give me 256. Okay, so now in my calculator, I can do 49 minus 256. 49 minus 256 is going to give me negative 207. And there is my value for my discriminant. Great job. Okay, numbers 7 and 8. We're asked to actually solve each equation with the quadratic formula. So this might take a minute, but that's okay. First thing we want to do, identify your A, your B, and your C. Okay, so I'm going to write it over here. A is +2, B is -2, and C is -24. Okay, so now we're going to actually write the entire quadratic formula without the A's, the B's, and the C's because we know what the A's, the B's, and the C's are, okay? So we have x is equal to -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, and I'm going to fill in these spaces with what we know. Okay, the first space is -b. b is -2. Okay, b squared again, so it's another -2. Minus 4 times a is +2, times c, -24, all over 2 times a is +2. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to solve for the discriminant first, just what we were doing, this piece right here. So I have -2 squared. In fact, I'll write it down here. So -2 squared minus 4 times 2 times -24. We're just solving for this discriminant piece. Okay, so first piece, -2 times -2. I get +4. I'm going to subtract my next piece. I can put this in my calculator. 4 times 2 times -24 is going to give me -192. Okay, well, what happens when we have a double negative? Turns into a positive. Okay, and 4 plus 192 is 196. Okay, so we filled in our discriminant. So let's go ahead and rewrite it in our formula. Okay, so we have x is equal to, again, what happens when I have this double negative? Minus -2. Actually turns into a positive, right? Plus or minus the square root of 196, right? That's what we got for inside our discriminant. All over 2 times 2, which is 4. Okay, well, let's actually figure out what is the square root of 196. So in your calculator, you can hit second and x squared because there's this little square root. Okay, so x squared, I'm going to put 196. Ooh, easy peasy. That just turns into a 14. Okay, so now what I have is 2 answers. So now I know that that's 14. I'm going to write my 2 answers. X is equal to 2 plus 14 over 4, and x is equal to 2 minus 14 over 4. Remember, that plus or minus is what's giving us our 2 answers. So let's figure out our first one. What is 2 plus 14 on top? 16. Okay, and what is 16 divided by 4? It's going to give me 4. So our first answer is just positive 4. Okay, let's figure out our second answer. What's 2 minus 14 on top? Negative 12 over 4. What's negative 12 divided by 4? And our second answer is negative 3. And you did it. You solved for the quadratic using the entire quadratic formula. So let's do that one more time. Last example. So we have number 8. First thing we want to do, identify our A, our B, and our C. Okay, so A, B, C. I know my A, which is right in front of the B, is just 1. My B, negative 2. And my C, negative 8. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead, fill in my quadratic formula. So I have x is equal to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, I just left the spaces because we know what a, b, and c are now. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill in our formula. So negative b. Okay, so b is negative 2. So I know that goes there. Another b goes here. Minus 4 times a is 1, times c, which is negative 8. All over 2 times a is 1. Okay, so the next part we're going to solve is the discriminant. Okay, we know how to solve the discriminant, so I'm going to bring this down here. So we have negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 8. Okay, first piece. What is negative 2 squared? Negative 2 times negative 2. It's going to give me a positive 4. I know I'm going to subtract my next piece. Okay, my next piece is 4 times 1 times negative 8, which is going to give me a negative 32. Okay, well, what happens when I have a double negative? Turns into a positive, which now we know 4 plus 32 is 36. So we can fill in this 36 where that whole discriminant was. So let's rewrite our formula. So we have x is equal to double negative here, so that's going to change into a positive 2, plus or minus the square root of 36 all over 2 times 1, which is just 2. Okay, well, what is the square root of 36? If you don't know, check your calculator. Okay, so click second, come down here to this button, x squared, because that's that little square root. Okay, and I'm going to type in 36, and that gives me 6. So we can change that square root of 36 to a 6. So now I'm going to do my two answers. My first is x equals 2 plus 6 over 2. And my second answer is x equals 2 minus 6 over 2. Remember, that's where we're getting that plus or minus. Okay, so let's solve for our first answer. 2 plus 6 on top is going to give me 8. What is 8 divided by 2? Positive 4 is our first answer. Okay, what about on bottom? I have 2 minus 6 on top. Negative 4. What is negative 4 divided by 2? Negative 2. Okay, so we found our two answers using our entire quadratic formula. Okay, those are your review notes. Make sure you, whoops, just bumped the camera. Make sure you do the assignment that goes with it, and you may use these notes on your test next time.